Good afternoon and welcome to History and Systems of Psychology. I'm excited to be here with you today. Week 14, day 2. After this week, we have one more week of classes and then you have your final. And since we don't meet to take the exams, you will have until Sunday of the end of finals week to submit that along with your photo voice project. Any questions about those two items? All right, excellent. I'd like to start our conversation by discussing the Seligman video on positive psychology that you watched. I hope that you enjoyed that TED Talk. I think he's a pretty clever fellow and had a lot of interesting things to say. And I'd ask you to take some notes, so if you need to pull those up, that I can wait a moment for you to do so.
Talks about the 3 happy lives, the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life.
Okay, thanks for getting us started. Someone else, can you differentiate between those 3 different styles of life according to Seligman? Yeah.
Present life is about like savoring the joys.
Mm-hmm.
The good life is doing activities that allow you to shine and use your strengths.
I like the way you describe that. Activities allow you to show strengths, or here's a little sun for shining.
Meaningful life is like channeling the strengths into something bigger
Than yourself, right? Good. So channeling good life into something more meaningful. All right, so we have our definitions of the different styles of life, and I thought that was a really unique way of looking at things. When we think of the word pleasant, that sounds good, right? You have a pleasant life. Well, I would like that. And on the surface, it looks good, but it is very much a superficial way of life in many ways. When he showed pictures of people who personified this sort of life, I believe that Pam Anderson and someone else, George Clooney, were on the screen, right? So this idea that these people have reached a certain status and they're recognized by others and they have everything they need and more, right? Those people have a pleasant life. Now, there was mention of the extent to which your feeling of having a pleasant life is genetic. How much was that, Kylie? Do you remember?
I think he said like majority of it.
50%. 50% of this you have no control over, right? And this is a video that I've also shown in Psychology of Personality. And so some of us, and I would be included in this, are set a little lower. Just probably not the happiest person by way of birth, right? And so my pleasant life might look different than someone else's pleasant life. All right. Not a bad thing to live here, but a little bit more superficial. We get to the good life, and who was personified, or what example did Seligman use? Who did he talk about in terms of the good life? It was a friend he had by the name of Lynn. Is that ringing bells?
The guy who was successful but not like a cold fish, I think. he
Yeah.
described him.
And the guy was quick to call himself a cold fish, right? We have Lynn. I believe he was a stockbroker, trader, that type of thing. And he received so much fulfillment from his job. So that was a very fulfilling profession for him. Seligman talks about the concept of flow, being in that moment where time stops because you're so engrossed in an activity that you're good at and that you're interested in. Lynn lived a large part, I mean, your work life is going to be a large part of your life, right? In that flow. Strong purpose, and I would say passion. If we're talking about grit, he would be considered a really gritty person in the workplace. He also had an activity that he enjoyed immensely, and what was that?
I'm just gonna be honest, I'm gonna go start with this.
Did he play cards? Am I making that up?
That rings a bell, something like that.
It does. I think that's what it was.
He was a champion bridge player.
Okay, so specifically bridge, all right. And that's cards, right? I've never played bridge, but I know people who have. And this points to the need or the power of those quote-unquote recreational activities adding value to our life, right? How many of you feel like you have that type of activity in your life? It may be more passive, so to speak, like reading or something like that, or more active, or anything that runs in between that. Can be a form of escape, can be a form of, producing calmness, happiness. Where Lynn lacked was in the relationship department, specifically the romantic relationship department, right? And he could not figure out why he was unsuccessful in romantic relationships. Well, looking at his life was pretty full already, right? If you're that engrossed in work and you have this activity outside work that you're super passionate about, first of all, it doesn't leave you a lot of time to, I want to say be on the hunt. That sounds very Darwinian for a romantic relationship. He went to psychoanalyst in New York who wanted to unpack his childhood, right, in a Freudian manner and figure out the root of this. And they were thinking, well, there must be some sexual root to all of this because that's what psychoanalysis is about. 4 or 5 years, unsuccessful. So Seligman and Lynn came to the conclusion that, he really did have that good life. He was pretty fulfilled overall. And even though some of us who may value relationships more as more of a central foci of our lives might say, oh, he really missed out. In a lot of ways, he probably didn't. And that's how Lynn was built. Now we're moving up the chain. If we had a little triangle, I would say this would be at the apex. This is the meaningful life. And Christina got us started by saying basically those qualities that you have in that good life, you're applying and you're using them to maybe create something more meaningful for people other than you, or maybe you would be involved in volunteer work, things of that nature. So you're giving back. It's not all about you. Tell me people who might fall into this realm. Mother Teresa would be an example if you know who she is, right? I would say she is beyond self-actualization and into that transcendence that we're actually going to talk about. So giving her life in the service of others, right? And helping a lot of people. There are other examples, so I may ask you in class on Tuesday if you have any for me. But these are the people that make that lasting impact on the world. But they don't do it instead of having their own life. According to Seligman, they would have to have the components of the good life in order to establish a meaningful life. Because you have other people who on the surface are doing volunteer work because they say it helps others, but in fact are maybe using that to fulfill some sort of need in themselves, right? Rather than from more of just a benevolent sort of thing. Any questions on that? That's a big focus of the presentation that you watched. Other takeaways. Madison.
Let's see. He said that he challenges the conventional view that happiness is merely the absence of negative emotions.
More than absence of negative
Emotions.
emotions. Good. Meaning happiness is more than not feeling bad all the time, right? And I think sometimes happiness, when you talk about positive psychology, maybe even isn't the best descriptor, because can you make it your goal to be happy, or should you make it your goal to be happy? Is that truly achievable?
I feel like maybe wording it differently, like finding happiness and like finding things that bring you joy,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a different way of
Yeah.
achieving happiness, I guess, but just like you can't just be like, oh, I'm happy.
That's exactly right. We can search for happiness, and if someone is a humanistic or positive psychologist, they can help us along the way, because we're each going to have a very individual search to get there. Also, this idea of choosing happiness, not in a toxic positivity kind of way, like I will be happy, but more in a habitual way, like William James, how he was able to, in a way, talk himself out of his depression and his existential crisis by doing differently each day and doing that over time. Again, there is that genetic component that we can't, that we have to consider. Also, when you're happy, those are moments oftentimes that, they just come about. It's like a fleeting moment, right? The idea of having a purpose-driven life, I think, is more attainable. And through having a purpose-driven life, you are going to obtain happiness, right? But if we all set our sights on, we need to be happy all the time, we're going to be disappointed and unhappy, right? Other things from the video. Christina.
I think Andy talked about the full life versus the empty life.
Okay, let me erase the board and I'll write that up there. So hold that thought. All right, tell us about let's start with the empty life.
It's life without the happy key elements.
Okay. Missing key elements. Okay. Anything else anyone want to add to that? I would tag on to this. I think an empty life is also when you're living for someone else, or you're living a life to maybe try to please others as you perceive them. So there's a lot of perception involved, and we can get into that rut of being people pleasing. I would say rehabilitated. I'm a work in progress with that, right? Something that through life experience and talking to a therapist. I think everyone should have a therapist. That's just my personal opinion. I learned that maybe I shouldn't have an ego that thinks I know what other people are thinking at any given moment, or that I'm like that important to them, right? So you can live your life like that and it can end up being really empty. So the sooner that you can figure that out, I think the better your life is going to be. And, you live life on your own terms to a certain extent, still being able to connect with others and form meaningful connections. All right, so the full life is... not that, right? Kind of like he says at the beginning when they ask for a soundbite about the state of psychology. And he says, good, right? And then that's not the right answer. So then he says, well, not good. I thought that was really funny. So anything else from that video?
I like that you said you can build happiness by using what you're good at.
Good.
It feels good to, do good at something.
It sure does.
And I feel like it gets really easy to forget what you're good at when you're not feeling happy. So I like that you pointed that out.
Okay, to that end, on a piece of paper or on your computer, I want you to list 5 things you're good at. We'll do intervention. No. I'm an educational psychologist. I'm not qualified to do a clinical intervention with you, but we will talk about this. Take 30 more seconds. Krista, can we start with you? Okay. Art. So visual art and more specifically painting. That is great and a skill that I wish I had. Good. All right. Eric.
Being non-judgmental.
Okay.
with the exception of people who brake on the on-ramp. And I'm very much judging them. They can drive me to the wall for all I care.
Oh my goodness, okay, all
But other
right.
than that,
But other than that, had dramatic, but okay. Non-judgmental, good quality. Christina,
Forgiving people.
not everyone can do that. Jasmine,
Communicating.
there we go, it's out there now. Kylie,
I said I was good with plants, like gardening.
horticulture,
Yeah.
we'll make it fancy. Addison,
Said I'm a good listener.
and Kaylee.
Math.
I
Wow.
like it. Did you know that? She might be someone to talk to for stats help at some point. Was this easy or hard to do?
Kind of hard.
Why?
I feel like for myself, I second guess. Like if I'm really good at that.
Wow, okay. Why do you think you do that?
It's kind of personal.
Mhm.
I never got the reassurance being told that I was good at something growing up.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's,
worried about that.
yeah. And I think there are probably more people than you would think in this class that have that to a certain extent. And that's a hard way to grow up. This idea we will talk about, I don't know if we'll get to it today or not, but with Adler and this idea of a felt minus versus a felt plus, meaning that, let's say we'll take your art activity, and let's say that I was very passionate about visual art, which I wasn't, but let's just say I was. But I just don't have it going on. It's not gonna get there, right? And when I'm 5 and 6, everyone says, "Oh, this is delightful artwork," and even I know it's probably not good, but it makes me feel good about myself, right? And then we get into 4th grade, which is when much more social comparison starts historically in education, and all of a sudden, I'm getting graded on my artwork, and no one's saying this is beautiful or great, like they did in kindergarten and 1st grade. And it's such an expression of yourself. I'm getting a grade and it's not an A. Maybe it's not even barely a B. And this is something I really want to do. So I may decide that I'm going to quit that. I start getting people saying, you're really not good at this and things of that nature, and I become a felt minus. So this idea that I'm less than because what I'm wanting to pursue is being met with lots of animosity and like, you shouldn't do that type thing. So maybe a parent says, well, if you're really interested in art, maybe you could go into career in graphic design or something related to it that you don't have to have those kind of technical skills. And that might be okay. Also, you could be like Kristen, be really good at art and everyone thinks you're really good, but you were told by someone that that's a challenging way to make a living and that's okay as a hobby, but you need to do something real. And that's really hurtful. That's really hurtful. As someone whose first career was a dancer, I can't tell you how many times he'll be like, you really do that as a job? Like, yeah, I do. Huh, well, when are you gonna do something grown up? And it was just like, really? And that's hurtful, right? It's a lot to fight against. So the idea is that and I'm on a tangent now, but I want to talk about that a little bit, is that in life and in adult life, what we try to do is we try to move from that felt minus to a felt plus, right? And so finding joy maybe in those activities that you were told were not things that you should pursue. That's just one example. Yeah. Okay, so most of you thought this was a little challenging to do for various reasons. I understand. Now, go ahead and jot down, and I'm just gonna ask a few of you to share something that brings you fulfillment. And we could consider these, it could be something in the academic or work realm, or it could be a hobby that you have that makes you feel really fulfilled. Maybe you get into that flow state where time passes and you don't realize it because you're so engrossed and interested in the activity. And you don't have to list 5, but you can list 5 if you have 5 to list. Okay, about 10 more seconds. Would 1 or 2 of you be willing to share? Reading?
Yeah, when I read a book, I just get so enveloped in it that it's really easy for me to like get in a flow state, I guess.
Yes,
I start a book, I read it in a day. Can't put it-
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like can't put it down. Is there a particular genre?
I like thrillers and mysteries.
Nice, yeah, that's great to have that and have that be something that's fulfilling because it's also great for your mind
Yeah.
and for your emotional health.
I'd say like being around kids and like getting to like nurture. Like I've always wanted to be a mom. And like,
Okay.
that's like one of my big goals in life.
Uh-huh.
And so like getting to like be around kids that look up to me and like getting to guide them, it just kind of makes me feel good.
That's wonderful. And they're also winning in the process as well. Anyone else want to share?
Doing any type of activity with my son.
With your son? Okay, really fulfilling. What are some things that you two do together?
There's a duck pond in
Mhm.
Bartlesville. He loves to go there, and we'll go there and we'll feed the geese and the ducks, and he just really enjoys it.
I think that's awesome. And he'll have really good memories surrounding that. So when he looks at a body of water, he'll remember that. That's awesome. All right. Let's go to, these can all be the same or overlap, right? But this may be something different. You're living a purpose-driven life, we hope. What fills you with purpose? Doing what? Does that make sense what I'm asking? What gives life meaning and purpose to you, for you? Okay, take about 10 more seconds. Would like to hear from 1 or 2 or 3 or more of you on this. Eric, do you have something for us?
Dude.
Okay.
So I've always been a helper.
Uh-huh,
Like even I had a 22-year career as a paramedic.
uh-huh.
I kind of saw a need, like somewhere along there, I didn't always find the healthiest or the most healthful coping mechanisms, but I feel like I did fairly well, realizing like, hey, this is an issue, like, and figuring it out. A lot of fellow first responders had not been that lucky. So one of the reasons I decided that I wanted to come back to school was so that I could help the helpers, so that they could continue helping.
I like that. So a greater calling, and that's utilizing your strengths and your personal experience in that. It's wonderful. Someone else want to share? Krista?
I know for mine, I put raising my daughter and
Uh-huh.
then teaching her kind of like how my life went and like different things in my life, teaching her and like bringing her up in a way that's better than how mine was, like looking back on like what I've experienced and being like, okay, like I didn't know much about this when I was growing up. Nobody ever explained it to me, and it would have been a lot easier if like somebody had talked to me about this stuff.
Yeah.
So whenever as she gets older, like showing her things, explaining to her, like bringing her up in a way where she understands things better and has a better life.
I think that's wonderful. So the parent as a guide, still like enforcing like discipline, whatever that looks like, but guiding and coaching. That's what we call a coaching parenting style. It's wonderful. So she's very lucky. I'm going to have to start the PowerPoint now, but I've loved hearing from you. All right, we are going back to revisit Maslow. We've revisited him through many different lenses now on several different days. New York in the 30s was known by many as the New Athens when it came to psychology. Thinking back to Greece, ancient Greece, right? Lots of progressive thought was going on. Major philosophers were on the scene, and sophists were educating the public in a new way, right? These traveling teachers. Maslow experienced the impact of pervasive anti-Semitism in the 1930s. Remember, he had studied at the University of Wisconsin. He found it very hard to get a job anywhere as a professor because of the anti-Semitism. However, and he had his PhD. In 1937, he finally obtained a paid low-level position at Brooklyn College, and that allowed him to stay in New York. And there had recently been an influx of psychologists from Germany and other, we'll say, intelligentsia, educational influencers coming into New York. I'm going to read you a quote. This is a quote from him. The job that he obtained had a crucial fringe benefit because it enabled him to stay in New York. He later recalled, "It's fair to say I have had the best teachers, both formal and informal, of any person who ever lived." That's really great praise, right? Just because of the fortunate accident of being in New York City when the very cream of European intellect was migrating away from Hitler. There has been nothing like it since Athens. Maslow's experience in the New Athens served him well, broadening and modifying his original behavioristic views with a variety of alternatives. And part of what we talked about, the American approach to psychology being more eclectic and accepting of new information, new ways of looking at things. He also established personal friendships with several neo-Freudian psychoanalysts, so people who practiced in the general vein of Freud, but with some changes. And based on the neo-Freudian who would be doing the analysis, those changes might look slightly different. He was also around Gestalt psychologists who had recently arrived from Europe, and he met through his wife an important American anthropologist. So lots of things came together for him that made it a very exciting time when a lot of things were going on that, him being Jewish, lots of safety concerns going on, right? But a very fulfilling time for him in his work life. In New Athens, he established friendships, like I said, with different people who had recently arrived from Germany. His wife studied anthropology at Wisconsin, and through her studies, both of them became friends with someone by the name of Ruth Benedict. Maslow, it says, was very impressed by both her personal and professional qualities. Benedict had been born partially deaf and was a woman in a very male-dominated field. She published the groundbreaking book Patterns of Culture. She promoted the idea that this idea of culture had been restricted within the field of anthropology. She thought it could be thought of as analogous to the idea of personality within psychology. And Maslow found this connection between anthropology and psychology, this potential connection, really, really fascinating. So she had a really heavy influence on his work life. She also encouraged him to write a chapter for her book about the relationship between these two fields of study entitled Personality and Patterns in Culture. Neo-Freudian mentors included Adler. Adler is someone who is discussed a lot in psychology of personality. He had a profound influence on the field of psychology of personality, particularly due to the emphasis he placed on the family, how you're raised, the family constellation in which you grow up, which means where are you birth order-wise? Are you the oldest? Are you the youngest? Someone in between? Are you the only child? And the influence that has on the development of personality, as well as the influence that the environment and the parenting behaviors have on the developing child. And it's pretty fascinating. He wrote some really good things on parenting, and that was a particular interest of his. He also talked about this idea of the felt plus and minus and how we need to move toward that. Having confidence in ourselves, having a good sense of self-esteem. So that's someone we could talk about for several classes, but it's going to be more of a soundbite here. You're welcome definitely to read more about him, and I'm happy to guide you on that if you want more information. How many of you had heard about Karen Horney? You have, yes. All right. Only person in class? I'm going to pull up something for you real quickly. Talk about her for a moment. She had training in psychoanalysis. And was a patient of the Freudian analyst Carl Abraham. She obtained a psychiatric degree in 1915. I can't imagine how difficult that would have been as a female to do that, so that's pretty impressive. And she is known mostly for relational theory and the interpersonal psychoanalytic approach. Although heavily influenced by Freud's ideas, she definitely felt that he put way too much emphasis on sex and not enough emphasis on the social aspect of our lives. She said, why do you think that people have penis envy? They could have womb envy, right? So speaking, it was really the glimpse of speaking from a female perspective, and that was so unique for that time period. Opened up a lot of different ways of thinking, and also that emphasis on the interpersonal orientations, relations with one another. And she talks about the way that we relate to others. We can move away, we can move toward, or we can move against. So if you're moving towards someone, you seek love and you're trying to minimize apparently selfish needs, okay? And it's good to move toward people, right? You may also move against. So we could think of a toxic friendship where you're like, every time you're with this friend, you think after, I feel worse about myself, or I feel so tired, they've drained all the energy out of me. They're like a little vampire, right? And so you may find that it's necessary and healthy to move away. And so you have that interpersonal orientation, that sense that you need to move away, and that's good for you, right? And then sometimes moving against, sometimes you need to oppose a thing, a person, what have you. In the healthy individual, Horney said that each of these ways of orienting are good. We should use a combination of these in our lives. She also talked a lot about the neurotic tendency. The neurotic tendency arises when we end up using just one of these. All right, so I want to read just a little bit from this book that I have. So if we're moving toward people and we have this neurotic solution, it can look like this. Morbid dependency, codependency on a partner, okay? Especially a romantic partner. Poor little me, you're weak and helpless, okay? I can't do anything on my own. I need others to kind of support me and give me confidence. Self-subordination, assumption that others are superior. Martyrdom, what does that mean? You become a martyr? Ideas? What's a martyr?
Pushing away what you want for the good of whoever.
Self-sacrificing. Okay, someone who says, you're in a relationship, I've done all this for you, I've sacrificed my time, my energy, and you're not appreciative, right? That could be an extreme of that. Need for love, so people who neurotically try to find self-worth in a relationship, and if they're not in a relationship, they don't feel whole. All right, so those people, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying like your better half. I understand the reason for saying that, but you should also be a whole in and of yourself, right? Moving against people who choose this neurotic, and I say choose, but it happens, neurotic situation, adopt an expansive solution to neurotic conflict. The solution may become narcissism. I'm going to move against people. They're in love with their idealized self-image. Perfectionistic, have very high standards. Arrogant, need to be right. You got to be right. You got to have the last word, okay? We know people like this, right? And we, as healthy individuals, can occasionally be like this, and that's okay. But if you're like that all the time, it gets really old for other people, for sure. Need for recognition, so this need to be admired in whatever endeavor it is. And then the neurotic solution for moving away from people is going to be to seek freedom at the expense of relationships and achievement. They may be averse to effort and change. They're just kind of like, I'm just going to stay in my own lane and do my own thing. They may rebel against constraints or influences. At the extreme, that's your people who are antisocial might fall into that. They could live in a very shallow way, like more the pleasant life way, I would say. But this is at the extreme. People who are onlookers, like they feel like they're on the outside looking in. They never feel part of, so their back is kind of like an audience member of other people's lives and maybe even of their own. They could be really self-sufficient and independent. You know, I'm going to draw myself up by my bootstraps and I'm going to do this and I'm going to forge ahead and I don't need anyone else. Or they may be someone who has this need for privacy that, you know, just really keeps other people out to the extreme. So again, I just want to mention we have these 3 interpersonal orientations as quote unquote whatever healthy individual means. We use all 3. And we sort of have our little emotional antenna out to figure out what we need to do. But if someone's neurotic, they're going to lean on one of these solutions and ignore the other 2. I wish I could talk about Horney more. She's pretty fascinating, but we're moving away from her. Okay, that was a bad joke. Okay, Fromm. Another Neo-Freudian, he developed this conviction that human beings are unique among animals due to their relative freedom from domination by their instincts. We have a lot of psychologists who talked about the fact that we are driven by our biological instinct, right? And Freud is one, and we're driven for certain things. And even behaviorists, I think, might fall into this category, right? We have freedom from domination by their instincts, and that was a relatively new idea. This sounds really good, freedom from our instincts, right? But this comes at a price. One of them is an awareness of existential dichotomies. When you have choice, and the more choice you have, it sounds great, but choosing to do one thing leaves out all the other things, right? And if you decide you're going to focus on a really narrow area, then I mean, you're in here and maybe you're really gritty about that, but all of this other part, as you've made a decision to do this, you've excluded all of that. And so either in the moment or looking back, you may say, hey, you know, existential dilemma, your eyes are open at night because you're feeling like I made the wrong decision type of thing. Existential crisis. How many of you know The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost? That poem? I had to memorize it, but I only remember bits and pieces. So we are going to, I'll put this up on the screen. Would anyone like to read it for us? Find another one. Or you can just listen to my melodious voice, right? No takers? All right, here I go, in my best poetic style. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Okay, so we have these 2 roads. And decided to take one, then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. So this idea of, you know, sort of this grassy knoll type thing and is in need of wear, I'm going to choose that road. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Feedback on that. I don't think I had the cadence down, that's all right. Okay, so, goodness, was not meant to incite trauma of any sort. What's the meaning of the poem, basically?
He's looking back on his life and said, okay, I had these two big options and I took, you know, the straight and narrow versus the wider, more taken path, and that
Yeah.
made all the difference for me.
Yeah, it says, you took the one less travel by, so maybe you chose a type of life or style of life that was a little bit different and more individual, and he's able to look back and say, yeah, I made the right choice. That made all the difference in my life, this road that I took. And there are, you know, a lot of people talk about there are times in your life where there are these two big decisions to be made, and those are important decisions, but my philosophy, for what that's worth, is that life is a series of small decisions all the time that end up leading you to those big decisions, right? And so some people don't continually make decisions, and then all of a sudden they find themselves on a road, right? And they're like, I don't know how I got there. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay, poetry time is done for the day. Fromm also said we can achieve only a small fraction of all the possibilities of our life. He also talked about the struggle to maintain individuality in society. So how, you know, Robert Frost might be taking this road, he doesn't see many people on it, and times it's like looking around, well, should I go back to this? I see all the people on this road and they look like they're having fun. So, you know, this having that belief. All right, lots and lots of mentors, Gestalt mentors of Maslow, Wertheimer, and Goldstein. These were people who were at the New School for Social Research, and I don't think, maybe this link will work. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. It's been around for a long time. This is the New School. If you want to learn about it, emphasis on, it says, study with leading scholars and public intellectuals committed to expanding the boundaries of social thought in one of the world's hubs of scholarship and culture, New York City. Sounds pretty exciting, doesn't it? Yeah. So they stress critical engagement, interdisciplinary centers. So thinker engage in dialogue with leading thinkers as you reframe local and global challenges at our centers and institutes. And they talk about the fact since its inception, it has a tradition of challenging the orthodoxy. Anyway, I thought you might find that interesting. Uh-oh. That's not mine. Let's see, what have I done? Nope. There we go. That looks interesting. Okay, Wertheimer extended this Gestalt point of view to general subjects of learning and creativity. And I thought this was really interesting. He believed that the most important learning was not the result of trial and error, but rather sudden flashes of insight that are often reported by creative people. And he literally called these the aha moments. He thought that is where the most important learning is occurring. Have you had those flashes of insight? You've been looking maybe for a solution to a problem, and then maybe you stop thinking about it for a little while, and then it's there?
A lot of times to do that with papers. Like I kind of have a general idea about how I want it to go, but a lot of times I'll think about it and just have like one sudden insight that's like, oh hey, this is how I can
Yes.
relate it, and this is how I can open and kind of lead into the whole subject.
Yeah, and that I like to tell students to let your paper breathe for a while. Let it sit. If you're getting stuck, that means you need to start way before it's due. In grad school, I didn't always practice what I'm preaching right here, but writing a paper, writing a research article for to submit for publication, it takes a lot of time, and I think it takes a lot of creativity. It can be exhausting, and I've never written super easily. But I found that if I can get to that point and just set aside the paper and maybe even do some sort of creative activity in the moment, walking around sometimes helps really quickly, or let it breathe for several days, I come back to it and it's like, why didn't you consider this option? This is what you need to do. But I was so blinded with my narrow, kind of funnel-like perspective at the time. So I like to hear that happens. Anyone else have that writing papers? Good, good. So 2 of you, all right. The relationship that he developed with Wertheimer was almost a father-son type relationship, so a really close mentor of his. And he imparted 2 related lessons that would prove crucial to Maslow's later career. He emphasized strong moments of joy and the positive emotions that accompany those aha moments. And he talked about moments where we suddenly perceive the world in a new and appreciative way. And Maslow later referred to these as peak experiences. So if you look over your life, like over the past year, maybe you can think of some moments that were those that you really appreciate, kind of like shining diamond moments, and those are called peak experiences according to Maslow. Wertheimer talked a lot with Maslow. He felt that traditional psychology emphasizes illness and maladjustment way too much and doesn't look at the positive aspects of the human experience. And often how it works, you get connected with someone else who then connects you with someone else, right? Through Wertheimer, Goldstein became friends, he became friends with Goldstein. Goldstein applied the Gestalt concept to analysis of brain-injured soldiers. Remember, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. He observed the brain as a whole try to take over the functions affected by the injury. This idea of Gestalt idea to looking at the brain. So someone injures their occipital lobe and loses a lot of their sight. The brain can often adapt, with the result that perhaps hearing becomes much more acute. Okay, so although you can't replace sight, your brain can adapt to that with other parts of the brain working in something beyond that small hemisphere. Does that make any sense at all? Everyone with me? Yeah. He also looked at this in a larger picture kind of way, referred to the tendency to maintain integrity and wholeness in the face of injury as a motive toward achieving self-actualization. All right, so at what college was Maslow teaching? Remember? In New York? We just talked about it. Brooklyn College. BC is the big hint there. Everyone good? He became very popular with students, several who came in for informal counseling. A little tricky if you're a faculty member, but he had a lot of people were attracted to his personality and his teaching style, basically, okay? During these times, when he was doing this informal type of counseling, he put his mentors' ideas to the test, so the Neo-Freudians and the Gestalt people who had come over from Germany, and found that the application helped them a lot. He then saw a need for a new course dedicated to the normal healthy personality. He'd been teaching abnormal psychology, and he goes like to the opposite end. So he developed and taught a very different kind of psychology course. Let's look at page 480 now as we talk a little bit more about self-actualization. I'm down toward the bottom of the page. Do you see where self-actualization is bolded? In his words, self-actualization occurs when the individual is doing what he is fitted for. A musician must make music, an artist must paint, a poet must write if he is to be ultimately happy. What a man can be, he must be. The tendency might be phrased as the desire to become more and more what one is, becoming everything that one is capable of being. And we may have already talked about that, but I think it's okay to talk about again. His definition of self-actualization appeared in an article entitled A Theory of Human Motivation. So when we talk about Maslow, he lives in a couple of different psychological camps. He's talked about in terms of humanistic psychology, positive psychology, and within educational psychology in the psychology of motivation. All right, this hierarchy of needs, the triangle that we've discussed, consists of 5. So the base needs are the physiological needs, that of food and shelter, that have to be in good shape, right? So a child who is hungry and maybe they're at a school that doesn't do like free breakfast, they're going to have a hard time concentrating, right? They're going to have a hard time either being awake or, if you haven't eaten a long time, you might get jittery and jumpy and hangry, right? And so maybe the teacher says something like, this child has a behavioral problem. And really, more of that needs to be unpacked. It could be the child's physiological needs aren't being met, or maybe the child's acting out. Well, that's because they are living, week to week in a different hotel. So they don't have stability, like shelter stability is so important, but we have a lot of kids in Oklahoma who don't have that, all right? Especially children raised in the foster care system. There's such a lack of stability, even in terms of, where you're living, who your caregiver is, all right? And that's going to impact things. So unless those needs are met, you can't begin to go up that triangle towards self-actualization. And I think we forget that. Safety needs. Okay, a child may be in a home, but it's in an area of town that's very unsafe, or there's violence in the home, right? So those needs, they're getting food and shelter, okay? They have a roof and they have enough to eat, but they don't feel safe. Again, if we think about this in an educational standpoint, it's going to be hard for them to concentrate. It's going to be hard for them to learn and grow to their full potential. Belongingness and love needs come next. So a child who is growing up who might be bullied or feels really different, like they don't belong, that can be a struggle, right? And then as we go up the triangle ladder, esteem needs. So the desire for stable, firmly based, usually high evaluations of themselves, which means you need to have your physiological safety needs met. You need to feel like you belong, right? Belonging comes before you can really feel good about yourself, right? You need to feel like someone cares about you. All right. So self-actualization can only occur when all other needs have been met. Everyone, this is important to remember. Based on our life circumstances, what's happening, some might be a choice, some might be we don't have any control over it. We can move up and down that triangle. I'm not saying like you get here when you're 8 years old, you're a very self-actualized, 8-year-old. That's not how it works. So throughout your life, you're probably going to move around on that triangle. What I talked about, which is not mentioned in the book, is transcendence. So I wanted to pull up something that I was searching for something that I could show you that was sort of, the information's right there and you don't have to read a whole lot. So let's see. We're gonna see if I can open this. We may need to do, let's see. Here we go. All right. So here, the definition of transcendence from Maslow: the highest and most inclusive or holistic levels of human consciousness, behaving and relating as an ends rather than means to oneself, to significant others, to human beings in general, to other species, to nature, and to the cosmos. Transcendence of self, which he calls living at the living of being, like capital being, is assumed to be most possible for people with a strong and free identity for the self-actualizing person. I thought you would find that interesting, and if I can get the mouse to cooperate. These are some different items that are characteristic of transcendence: loss of self-awareness, transcendence of time. We talked about the concept of flow. Transcendence of culture. Someone, we're rooted in a particular culture, right? Some people are rooted in that and they can't accept another culture. But for someone who is this transcendent person who has gotten to that level, they can rise above the culture. And that means they're also not going to look down on someone else's culture. They're going to understand everyone has a unique culture and truly be okay with that. And be objective about the culture that they've grown up in. Transcending your past, so being able to finally let go and make peace and accept who you are now. Transcendence of ego, it can be a mystical experience. Reconcile the fact that death is going to happen, pain is going to happen in your life. And it goes on for a few more. One is getting off the merry-go-round. I'd like for you to read that if you have a chance to before class on Tuesday. I'm not going to give you an assignment over it, but I thought you would find it very interesting. All right. I have a short activity I want you to do. We will be talking about humanistic psychology next week, particularly the work of Carl Rogers. He is the father of humanistic psychology, and humanistic and positive psychology dovetail together, all right? I look forward to that. For the last part of class, how many do we have? Let's do a group of 3 and a group of 4. I want you to think back of all the people. We're going to take the great man approach. Everyone we've covered this semester. Who do you think is the most important contributor to psychology as a whole? This doesn't necessarily mean the person you agree with the most, but who is that? And then I want you to justify your why. So talk amongst yourselves. You're probably going to have some differing opinions, and see if you can come to one person and give me a reason why that person is the most important person to psychology. All right? Okay. Give you about 5 minutes, then we'll do a very brief discussion. this group already done? That's. All right. And you have your justification written down? You're halfway finished. That's good.
You just want one paper or?
I just want you to read the justification somewhat. Yeah. All right, who would like to go first?
We said that Freud was a pretty big influence in psychology because he took a lot of people's ideas before him, like William James' idea of the stream of consciousness, and kind of modernized it to make it what it is today. And we feel that he made it very, very much easier to understand certain theories than they would have been if he wasn't around.
Okay, good, thank you.
We also picked Freud, unanimously.
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of our justification was it's just, if you name anybody else in the book, and if you go around and say, hey, who is this, who is this, who is this, you're not always gonna get a whole lot of people that recognize it, but Freud is gonna be probably the most recognized name.
I was
Just because
also
it's-
thinking of like Freud and the 6 degrees. Have you heard Kevin Bacon's 6 degrees of separation? Like if you look at especially, well, people who came after him and even during, so many of them are somehow in their study or in their work or their theoretical foundation are linked to him. So yeah, I can understand why you would pick Freud. He would be very happy to hear that. And he would assume that you would have picked him anyway. So real quickly, feedback about the book. I'm going to be teaching this course again. What do you think overall of the book that I used?
I liked it more than my typical textbooks, if I'm
Okay.
being honest. I found it really easy to navigate and
Okay, good.
interesting to follow along with. It didn't really
Right.
sound like a textbook, if that makes sense.
Okay. So this would be one I would keep.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for
So-
that. All right. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. One more week together